And it's a pleasure now for me to introduce Tanya Tucker, who's going to be leading us in a conversation, a fireside chat with Sean Goode and with Chief Chad Kasmar. This is a really important conversation at the outset of this initiative, as well as our time here together today. We really wanted to make sure that people felt like everyone's perspective is welcome and heard here. And so we wanted to exemplify that by bringing in two amazing leaders from across the country who have very similar understandings of what they want to see in the world, and they use a very different toolbox in order to accomplish their goals. So with that, we welcome onto the stage a fireside chat with Tanya, Chad, and Sean. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. So one of the great things about doing a fireside chat is you get the comfy chairs.
Yes.
So who knew exactly? So hello, and I'm Tanya Tucker with the Full Frame Initiative, and welcome to our fireside chat, Pathways and Perspectives, what brings us to this work. And in many ways, the previous panel was just a really great lead-in to the conversation that we're going to have today. And you've met both of these amazing leaders earlier today, Chad with the press briefing and Sean just on the last panel. So first, thank you for doing double duty today and joining us for this conversation. I know one of the important things that Rebecca has mentioned a few times throughout today is really the importance of the diversity of voices and perspectives that came together to put together the blueprint. And, part of the blueprint recommendations is, how do we put people into 911? And I think it's important for us to, and we've heard a little bit already, but to get to know you all a little more. Because this is more what's amazed me about this process and this endeavor is that people have come and gone way beyond just their title and their profession and really been willing to bring them their full selves and their experiences to this work. So I'm going to start with who is Chad? Who is Chad? What brought you to your work in law enforcement? And then also, what brought you to this work for Transform 911?
Thank you. So how much time do we have? Well, apparently Sean's wife has a twin sister because there's two women on this earth that are overly patient and supportive of two very difficult human beings. So who am I? I'm a third generation Tucsonan, raising fourth generation. I have two amazing sisters, difficult but amazing, and a brother. I'm a father. I'm a husband. I'm a little bit of an odd duck as a chief of police with a fine art degree. So I'm a guy that's always beat to his own drum and created my own space and thoughts through my life. And that's what drew me to the work of wanting to serve for the Tucson Police Department, and an amazing 21-year career at TPD and a year away as the interim director of our own 911 center gave me the space at a really difficult time in our profession as transforming, reforming, evolving, and it helped me see policing from a different perspective. And it also allowed me to meet and be embedded within, although I had responsibility of overseeing our 911 center when it was embedded within the police department, it was different having them being a reporting party to versus being embedded within. And I don't think if I had that year away, I would be here today as the chief. And another amazing thing that happened, and I want to celebrate the courage and leadership of my mayor, Regina Romero, was that I was also, through her leadership and vision, directed not through a process, but identified as a succession train, the right person at the right time to lead our police organization. So just honored and humbled to be here.
Same to you.
Sure. And I think it's being, well, this is hot. Being from, check, mic check. This is gonna take me back to my my hip hop rap star days. Give me a beat. Let's get it. Yeah, we here. In the building. Yeah, it's your boy. Okay, we're good. All right. You know, I come to this work, and generally I share that my first encounter with the criminal legal system was when I was a 6-year-old boy. And that's when I visited my brother, and the earliest memory I hold of my brother visiting him inside of a kid jail where he was locked up at the age of 13 until he was a 21-year-old man. I'm one of those kids that grew up in one of those families with parents that both suffer from mental health issues. My father was a Vietnam War vet who came back with an addiction and then later developed schizophrenia. My mother suffered from dissociative identity disorder. With my incarcerated brother, my sister who ran away, my other sister who's battled addiction the entirety of her life. Like, the fact that I get to share space is a miracle in some respect, but it's also because of so many people on this journey who saw me as a possibility to be developed and not a problem to be solved. And too often our neighbors who are in the midst of crises are being engaged as a problem and not a possibility, and ultimately leading to an outcome that solves what's happening in the moment. And the solution is often isolation and putting away, and not inclusion and creating space to thrive. And I come to this work because I remember my first interaction with 911 that wasn't a prank call, because I don't know any adolescent that didn't do like a 9, maybe, I don't know, guilty. But man, I tell you what happened when my butt still hurts. But not that I should revisit that trauma in a space like this, but if you're picking up what I'm putting down, it is what it is. But like, I remember like my mother and my father, they fought like all the time. My father had really deep anger management issues to go with his own trauma of his lived experience. And we left, my mother had had enough, and we walked all the way to a payphone, and most of y'all here know what that looks like. I can tell by the demographics in the space. I mean, we saw the rotary phone earlier, so if you connected with that, you absolutely connect with the payphone. And we walked, I remember, in the rain, like 2 miles to get to this payphone to call the police, and then they came and picked us up, took us back to the house, brought my father down in handcuffs, put him in the back of the car, took him away. We left with our things. And then we moved out of my dad's house. But I'm gonna tell y'all, my dad didn't become less angry as a result of that interaction. My dad didn't engage in a healing journey as a result of that interaction. He didn't begin to embrace our family with the type of love that we needed as a result of that interaction. So what brings me to this space is the hope that we can create a new catalyst of engagement that brings people along our healing journey, instead of engaging them in a practice that only exacerbates the harm that led them there in the first place.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I know if we just looked at both of you all on sort of paper, right? Your names, your titles, maybe your professional bios, we'd say, there's no way that the two of you should be sharing the stage, let alone work together for about a year on a common mission and a common vision. And so I'd love for you all to share. So what has this experience been like for you? What's been challenging, eye-opening? What's been a surprise for the two of you all working on this together?
Yeah, what's been challenging working with me? I know you got things to say.
I mean, he's handsome, he's
Yeah,
funny.
There's that.
I don't think I'm on.
That's the right time for you to be on.
Right.
Here you go. No, say that again.
Yeah. Handsome, funny. It might surprise or not surprise you that I actually grew up in a very similar situation to Sean. And that's something that we don't talk a lot about in public safety. That is a draw to the profession when you've grown up in environments that weren't healthy. You either become the next generation of that environment, or you're impacted as a young human being and decide, I'm not doing this. And that's what I chose to do. So like Sean, I had a father when he was alive, amazing dad, but battled with anger from the war also, and alcoholism. I have a little brother who's a recovering opiate addict, mental health, bipolar disorder, eating disorders. We have some significant family challenges and trauma. And so, not everybody on the Transform 911 journey made it, because I think a few people thought, wow, this is going to really look good on my resume on LinkedIn. And then they met Sean, and then they met me. And neither of us,
this is real work.
A common thing we share is we're not shy to share our experiences. I think another common theme that, and I love work, every time Sean speaks, I'm just glued to what he's saying, is to listen. And in this space, in this profession, in this world, there's not a lot of good listeners right now. Sean said it earlier, we live in a polarized world. So, living in a world where I'm embarrassed, no matter which party's running the country, I'm embarrassed to have my 2 children watch the news and contribute. I have a choice. And in my space on this project and my work in Tucson, I have the ability to do 2 things. One is not contribute to and resist the polarization of our country and listen. And the second is empathy. It's I have a choice. Sean and I have had some really difficult, so where's Moki? Moki too. Some really difficult conversations. And I'm a better human being, and I'm a better chief, and I'm a better father and a husband because of those conversations. So it's choosing to find common ground. It's choosing to genuinely listen and be empathetic. When you choose to listen to somebody else's lived experiences, it's not a personal attack on me or my profession to say, I'm sorry that you've had those experiences. And I think that's the beautiful part of the Transform 911 project. And again, not everybody made the journey because they weren't ready to listen, and they weren't ready to be empathetic, and they weren't ready to live in a really scary space. It's easy to be on the left and the right because that's where the masses are right now. It's harder to sit up here in this chair. When I go back Thursday night, I land, and an hour later, I'm in front of an amazing, beautiful group of Black pastors where we continue to talk about challenges and opportunities with our community. And so it's just, I'm excited. I had an amazing mentor that also set me up to be the next chief. And he once told me, never let the opportunity within a crisis escape you. And that's the opportunity. And that's why we're all here today in New Orleans, is to capitalize on the opportunity and create systems that work better than the ones that we have now.
Yeah. And thank you for leading with the affirmation of my humor and glaring great looks. Beyond the things on the surface, like it's complicated, right? Because I actually believe at the core of my being that we shouldn't live in a world that needs policing. When I close my eyes and imagine communities that are safe and sustained with absent of police involvement, I can kind of almost envision this place called suburban areas where I can begin to imagine police being called for noise complaints and for the types of things that aren't where the young people I serve that are being overly criminalized for their adolescent behavior. I can believe in that world. I can imagine that world. And I can also, if we had the time, can walk you from slave patrols to the moment of right now, so we can be grounded in why we are dealing with the complexity of the issue as it stands today. We don't have that time, I know, so I won't do it. But you pull me to the side if you got an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, and an old fashioned or two, maybe we can get all the way through it, right? But the point being is this, is that no matter how much I want to see your job go away, I also understand the reality of what we talked about last night, where in Tucson, you have 12-year-olds who are being enrolled by people who want to cause harm because they understand that those 12-year-olds will have alternative dispositions and won't be criminalized in the same way as they will as adults. And so they're leveraging that sentencing dynamic to advance harmful behavior, right? That's complicated. And policing can't solve for that. Policing is a stopgap. Programming is a stopgap. We have material conditions in the neighborhoods that our young people are living in that foster that have to change. But it's a both and collaborative that'll get us to that destination. I can't do this without you being enrolled in the possibility of abolition. I can't do it. I have to have you. We were evicted so many times when we were a kid. I got used to not unpacking the stuff. More often than not, it was because of me, right? And my anger management issues. What I know to be true is that if I want to tear down the place that you're living in, and I tell you that I'm tearing it down, you are going to fight me tooth and nail to make sure you have that structure in place So that way it can exist because you've relied on that structure. That structure is where you've thrived in, where you've grown in, where you developed a career in, where you support many other men, women, and non-binary folks that are serving in intentional capacities. But if I say, here is a place that we can build together, a place that envelops your skills, your talents, your perspective, a place that envelops my skills, my talents, a place that honors the collective us. But what we have to do is leverage the resources that have been poured into this structure to begin to create an alternative together. That's a much more compelling narrative and a journey forward that involves all hands. Because we can't build what needs to be built on the backs of marginalized folks. We need to build what needs to be built with the collective us that can hold that power and strength.
As you can see, they don't need me at all up here, so. But you both have mentioned, I think, some key things to this work and to certainly make these recommendations come alive, right? So yes, we've done some hard work to get to this point, but the real work truly begins today and going forward. And, you know, Chad, you were quick to point out, like, wait, here's some things in common we have, and how important it is to listen. And at a time when I don't believe we've been as polarized and sort of stuck in our camps as we are today, I'm interested to hear if there was anything during this process that you all learned about each other's point of view or perspective that actually made you rethink something.
So we were here 6 weeks ago, a collective, you know, it seems like 6 weeks ago, to really prepare for today. And we actually did some exercises that talks about the utopian world that I can get behind too, as a father and a husband, and also having experienced a life of traumatic experiences. You know, before I became a police officer, and certainly those experiences that I had through the profession. What I would share is, we spent several hours on exercises of designing what this world would look like and how to get there. I think one of the challenges that we're working through in our own community is, I don't disagree with that world that Sean describes. I think that should be the goal. And I think what we can have consensus on is there's mental health investment that has to occur. There's other systems beyond what we're talking about today, beyond the public safety or the 9 of the Transform 911 blueprint, are systems that have to have investment. And that's where the defund conversation gets complicated, right? Because there's different types of defund movements, but the idea is we should, like Sean said, invest in spaces and areas that are front end areas that then cut off, you know, what would have traditionally been criminal problems, maybe midpoint. So we're working through that in Tucson and with systems accountability, because it's complicated. It's really complicated. But I know this, when we decide we want a new car, it doesn't mean you get to stop paying on the car that you have. You have to keep making that payment while you're planning and figuring out what that next system. And I think in my perspective as a chief the last 2 years, and these are the experiences we got to share on this project, is it's dangerous because I have family that depend on the systems we're talking about, who do live in crisis and do struggle. And if we don't do this the right way, there's further harm that happens to not only my community, but my direct family. So going to an interaction that Sean and I had, and this is really difficult for a police chief, is we were talking through, and he told me, you know, I explained something that we were doing, and he said, well, that's a really great example of police propaganda. And I'll be candid, my first reaction was anger, you know, because I am working my tail off. At this job comes at the sacrifice of the time with my kids and my wife, and the job is bigger than this moment for me. I want to retire in my community and continue to raise grandkids and all these different things. So it's a special moment and opportunity that I have. But that's the balance. As a chief, we do a lot with the community in Tucson, but we don't talk about it because that really resonated. Well, I didn't like hearing it, and I chose not to respond to that comment for about an hour so I could listen and be empathetic to Sean's experiences. I have very different experiences as a chief. I have had children die in my arms. I have kept people from going to jail many times. We have a deflection and diversion program where we allow our officers to choose to not incarcerate somebody for an addiction, but get them treatment. We're doing a lot of things. We're far from perfect. And I think what I want to champion as a police chief and a part of this project is everybody in here decided to give up something really cool for New Year's. And that probably lasted about 6 weeks. And we don't ever acknowledge or give each other space that changing human behavior is really difficult. And nobody in here should be surprised or disappointed that we invest 4 months in a 911 call taker before they work by themselves, who's 18 or 19, or that we invest 9 months of training in a police officer, and we put a camera on their chest and a badge and a gun on their hip, and we tell them, "Good luck, go learn now," and we have bad outcomes. But you have to be 4 years of a tech school before you can be a plumber or an air conditioning specialist, or get a Bachelor of Fine Arts that doesn't do you any good when you become a police officer. So I think we're at a point, and I'm honored to just be a contributing, member of the Transform 911, over 100 contributing team members who got this project put together to now implement in our own communities, is that these are ongoing, complex conversations. We have to give each other grace and space to be human. And I'm better because of the tough conversations that I've had with my Transform 911 members, the ones that are no longer here. I didn't want to work with to begin with. If they're not ready to do the work, I don't have time for them. But it's through hard conversations that we're going to have growth in this space in our country.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Chad. Yeah. I say things sometimes, and I appreciate, and I speak with a certain conviction, and I know that can cut deep. And so, thank you for the grace and for bringing that into this conversation. It's and I want to echo something that Chad shared, and more directly answer your question, Tanya. Like in America, there's many places where Black and brown folks and marginalized folks are impacted, right? I mean, we can go through a buffet of opportunities. We can talk about education. We can talk about employment. We can talk about healthcare, right? We can talk about policing. We can we can talk about all the things. And as we go through the buffet of inequities, I think it's imperative that we ground ourselves that all of these things are being served on a plate of a systemic racism. And that you can't remove any one of them because the basis for their existence is the fact that we've operated in this way in this country since folks decided to come here, colonize, and take the land from those who it was native to. And as much like Chad's role for me is separate from Chad's humanity, right? Like I see Chad as like fully human, right? I see Chad as like the surfer. Right? Like these are things that I see when I see Chad that other people don't see when they see the uniform and the badge, right? But like when I see the uniform and the badge, I can't like untie that and take it off of the plate of a systemic racism that it's served from. And so I hold both of these things to be true. The more time I spend with Chad, the easier it is to humanize our shared experience. There's a book I recently finished reading called Humankind. And one of the things that it talked about, there was a story that during World War II, the soldiers on opposite sides of the battlefield began to sing Christmas songs back and forth to each other. And by the time they got done volleying Christmas songs, they no longer wanted to be in conflict. It also talked about how soldiers, when you look at their guns on the battlefields, would often have rounds on top of rounds on top of rounds stuffed into the rifle, because that's what took the most time, and they didn't actually want to shoot another person, but they wanted to have the appearance of doing what was right for their country. That the most people who are killed at war are killed from long-range weapons. What all this tells me is that when we see each other as fully human, our inclination isn't to cause harm, it's to lean in and honor our shared humanity. But when we dehumanize one another, then it becomes so much easier for me to inflict harm and show up with bias and operate out of a place that is toxic and perpetuates the racism that's at the core of this country. We won't get ourselves out of this trap by platitudes or performative conversations or even fireside chats. But we will when we have this lunch break in any moment now by going to talk to someone who you didn't come here with, that may have a different perspective and a different view, and asking them questions that go deeper than what do you do for a living and how did you get here? Like, and being intentional to acknowledge that the space may not be safe in that moment for them to share, but at least the invitation creates an opportunity for a future conversation where we could go deeper than the badge and the uniform that is often terrifying and triggering. And so thank you, Chad, for continuing to allow me to see your humanity. Even as we disagree in the function of how we serve, our shared humanity is what's going to galvanize the path forward for an elevated voice that will let us live into the liberty that I believe is truly a world where we abolish these systems that cause harm and perpetuate harm and immediately engage our community in a practice of healing.
Thank you. Thank you both. So, as Sean said, we are nearing our time and keeping you from lunch, so we don't want to do that. But I do just want to wrap up by saying, when we started this process together, we had this North Star, right, to guide this work, which was really, how do we transform and envision a 911 system for this nation that equitably and reliably increases access to well-being for people experiencing emergencies, for the professionals who staff 911, and certainly for the people who are deployed in response. And what I know about well-being is like demonstrated on this stage. In order to do that, we have to fight against the defaults that are so deep in our country and our systems, to see people as other, to see them as different as the default. And what you all are demonstrating and talking about is there's another way to do this. We can see people and their humanity, see them as whole, listen, respect, build relationship, be in relationship with one another. And so what we're hoping happens after today is that people take that blueprint, they look at these recommendations, and they are moved to action. But what it's going to take, certainly bringing together this diversity of voices and perspectives to develop them, that's going to have to be supercharged to actually move them to action. So in one or two words, is there anything else that I know, which is hard for both of you all, I know, but is there anything else that you would advise folks who now take up these recommendations and get to work in their communities, cities, and towns? How do they come together and work across the difference?
One or two words.
Or three.
Invest in your staff first. You have to do that. If your staff isn't getting the wellness support they need to work through their trauma and experience, because they do difficult work every day, and that stacks up on them, they're not going to be well equipped to have empathy, to listen, to be connected to the community they serve. So I recommend all the leaders in the room, you have to have wellness training for your staff and invest in them emotionally, and then they will invest emotionally into your communities.
Okay, got it. Grace selectively applied is favoritism. Grace selectively applied is favoritism. And the moment you other the other, you then become the other. And so true grace means that it has to apply to those who I am closest in proximity to their pain points and those who I would otherwise be distant from. Absent of that, we're playing a game of favorites, and we see where that's gotten us today.
Thank you. Thank you both for taking the time to have this conversation with us today. Thank you for your unwavering commitment to this work and the change that we want to see in the country. And personally, thank you for inspiring me in this work. I really appreciate it. Please join me in thanking both Chad and Sean.
Just wow. This is a really important conversation. I'm glad that we had to have it today. And I really want to thank Tanya for her skills and what she's brought and her gifts to this work. Thank you, Tanya. And Sean and Chad, thank you for exemplifying the vulnerability and how you treat your staff and your communities. It's really a model. It's inspiring.